Today's topic, what we have taken is how do we weave ethics in AI? Uh, we see that AI is becoming a very important part of our life. When I was looking at stats, I heard that I saw that 37% of companies already use AI in some way or other. In next 5 years, 80% companies will be using AI. Somebody was telling me that more than 50% of the population is interacting with AI, whether they know or not. It's directly or indirectly, whether it is through Gmail, whether it is through Siri or Alexa or any other, helpline. Most likely, we may end up, interacting with AI. AI is growing and affecting various aspects and various segments of our life and industry. And law typically is always a laggard when it comes to regulating technology. So laws will take time before it can pick up, and often we then look at ethics as an important element which will govern how a particular technology will behave. Uh, Again, uh, it can be used in two ways. The ethics is used in two ways. One is in development of technology, another is in usage of technology. And since AI, it is very important that the way the technology is developed, AI ethics is integrated into the technology, because a lot of his behavior later on, and since it's going to affect us substantially, if it is done right, you will see a great result. If it is done
आपण ज्या व्यक्तीसोबत
not
बोलत
right,
आहात
you may
त्या
end up
व्यक्तीने
having
आपला कॉल
a bad
होल्डवर
result. Uh, so, with going now to the speakers, right? Let me start first with Dr. Mihir Parikh. Mihir, can you just currently just talk on what is ethics? Quick primer on ethics and how it relates to law.
Sure, Vaibhav. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm based in Palo Alto, California, and one can say that a lot of AI technologies are getting developed here. So let's first look at quick aspect of ethics. Ethics is nothing but a philosophical view on what an appropriate behavior should be. Okay? So it's based in morality, it's based in integrity. In case of law, it's basically a part of this view as accepted by society is formalized into laws, acts, rules, and regulation. However, compliance with law is a minimum requirement. Beyond that, ethics guides what a right behavior should be. So basic ethics deals with philosophical view of what is an appropriate behavior is.
Thank you, Mihir. Um, why don't you why don't you let's look into ethics, right? You worked in AI for more than 20 years, right? And can you discuss some examples which comes up in AI from ethics perspective?
Sure. Basically, AI is nothing but a computer system, which is basically learning based on the historical data. So the ethical issues in AI really start with the birth of an AI model. When an AI model is developed, it starts with some historical data. Based on that, a model is developed. And then when model is used in practice, it has a feedback mechanism. So whatever happens during that feedback, it refines itself and reinforces itself. So AI is going to learn from what we do and not what we preach. Right? So companies have mission, vision, value statements. All of those AI is not going to learn from. What AI is going to learn from is what decisions the company has made in a given situation. And at the same time, it's not going to follow the company's PR propaganda, what company preaches, but it's going to look at how company behaves in making those decisions. And those behaviors are used as a data points in development of AI. So if those decisions have unethical behavior built into it, AI is going to have unethical behavior built into it. Just like a child learns from the actions of an action of an individual. If you preach to a child, you behave in an opposite manner. Child is not going to listen to what you are preaching. Child is going to behave the way how you are acting. However, as child grows up, child starts thinking what is right thing to do. At that point of time, child may behave differently. That's because what we call consciousness. Now, AI doesn't have consciousness at this point of time. And if it ever have a consciousness, how that consciousness is going to behave, we don't know. We have seen a lot of science fiction movies, but we don't know. So ethical issues in AI basically come from two aspects. One is how the AI model is built. And then when the AI model is used and it's reinforcing itself, what kind of behavior we see around in the organization.
Thank you, Mihir. Darren, let me come to you now. AI is one of the largest usage is in pharma, life tech, life sciences, biotech industry. I'm told that the largest amount of information actually is in human body, right? And this is where AI will become very, very useful because more data, better you can model your AI on. Can you give some examples and some thoughts on ethics in healthcare industry? What are the issues it faces?
Sure, Vaibhav. Thank you. So I think I'll start by saying that a lot of the issues that we are seeing at a fundamental level that applies to AI, it obviously percolates down to when it's being used in the healthcare sector as well. And like Vaibhav said, it is actually one of the best use case scenarios because there is so much of data that is being collected at a healthcare level that can be applied in the use of AI going forward as well. So I think I'll cover a couple of different industry models and how AI plays, in terms of what exactly it can do, as well as some of the issues that they're facing in terms of how to apply that model in the real world as well. I think one of the primary examples we can take up is in the drug discovery phase itself. So when a pharma company has to discover a new drug, it has to go through so many at the lab level itself in order to come up with the right active chemical compound that can have a therapeutic effect on a particular individual for a particular disease condition. Not just that, they also need to identify previous drug trials, how the drug has interacted with other medication, what exactly the population is, and how it reacts to a specific kind of population. So with the use of AI, a lot of this can be accelerated to a great extent, but we also find there are some issues that crop up because of the use of AI and how it is trained to be used. So one of the primary issues that I think in all industries will face is the fact that there is going to be a bias in the way in which the output of the AI even comes out. So especially in a drug situation, an ethical issue can automatically turn into a scientific problem. And that becomes very crucial because in a healthcare scenario, it affects life and death point of time. So when we look at it from a drug discovery point of view, the data points that we are looking at may be local data points. And this is something that even companies today that have a very active AI technologies, for example, IBM Watson, which is used in the detection of and treatment of cancer. Some of the issues that they're facing today, especially outside of the US, is that the AI has been trained to a large extent to deal with US patients. And the data sets that they are being taught on are based on US patients itself. That may not be the case with other jurisdictions and the use of that AI technology in other places. So there has been some difficulty in implementing this technology outside of the US because of the way in which it has been trained. Apart from this, there are other ways in which AI has been used in healthcare, especially at the community level. So one example I can give you is in terms of surveillance as well as the analysis of how a disease can progress. So this is actually something that's even being used today in dealing with the COVID situation, where we can see that an AI technology can be used to detect a particular area that has been affected so far using facial recognition technology or other means, using heat signatures of the public. You're able to identify whether a particular person, one, is conforming to the requirements of using personal protective equipment. The other is that if the person is showing symptoms at all. Now, apart from this, based on whether confirmed cases have been found in a particular location, you're even able to analyze and trace how that disease may spread from one locality to the other using AI itself. Again, there may be issues in terms of how that AI has been trained, because at the individual level or at the coders level is where this kind of data has been fed into the system. So any bias that the individual or the coder himself has, it may pass on to the system. So the identification or the recognition of particular symptomatic or non-symptomatic patients may also be biased based on, for example, if the coder was using a healthcare professional and his judgment was based on particular parameters, that same parameter would be applied on a large level when it comes to community healthcare. So these are a couple of examples I thought I'd bring out in terms of the issues that we may be facing today. Over to you, Vaibhav.
Thanks, Darren. In fact, what you mentioned, I was just reading a newspaper yesterday. This news item, it talks about in Netherlands, somebody has developed an AI platform to determine who is better fit for getting a respirator in COVID-19 situation when respirators are in high demand and cannot be given to everyone. Who is the best person to get that respirator? So it does create a lot of issues and a lot of questions in how that decision is taken and what kind of algorithm and data has been used for that decision to be taken. So that's something which is very, very important. Abhishek, let me come to you now. Now that we know that these are very serious ethical issues in AI, where a lot of things needs to be taken care of while development or while training in AI. Abhishek, can you tell us what role law plays in regulating AI?
So I think we can look at two sort of broad key elements or key roles that law per se would have regulating AI. One aspect of it itself is looking at how AI in itself is recognized by law, which is what is the legal personhood or what is the legal capacity afforded to AI under law. Now, when you think about or talk about legal personhood or legal recognition, it's essential that legal recognition or legal personhood is always tied to this concept of individuality, where you need to be a human natural person in order for the law to recognize you and provide you with certain rights and duties, and also to hold you subject to certain liabilities if you make a few mistakes or certain penalties if you sort of violate the law. Now, a very open point, a very critical point, which is being debated or being looked at under several different jurisdictions, is can AI in itself be afforded an independent legal personality? And a common example that's always brought up when you refer to this is how companies themselves have been an artificial legal personality has been created for corporate entities. Where you look at companies having an independent personality as compared to their shareholders, that is a common discussion that's come up where you're saying using that same argument, yeah, something on the similar lines can be afforded to also AI as well. But there is a critical difference here, which is why still there's no definite answer as to why AI can be afforded a different legal identity. Is companies at the end of the day, they still have shareholders who are responsible for the activities of the company and shareholders who make decisions on behalf of the company themselves. And the shareholders under law are also independently held responsible if something goes wrong. But a key element of artificial intelligence is that at the end of the day, there is an autonomous element where you can say that there is information plugged in by someone who is the developer of AI. But at the end of the day, the end result that's brought out by artificial intelligence is based on what it understands and the actions that it takes. So what is also why this debate has also been further is in the past few years, there have been actual examples of artificial intelligence being granted citizenship by certain countries, where there was an autonomous robot in the UAE called Sophia, which was granted citizenship by the UAE, which led to a lot of debates as to what were the grounds of granting legal recognition or citizenship to an AI. And also where in Japan there was an instance of a chatbot being granted separate legal personhood and treated independently as an independent legal entity. So the point is that having a specific understanding as to how AI can be treated under law is a very critical element. And what most of the jurisdictions or most of the countries are coming to a sort of, let's say, final viewpoint on this is that in order to grant AI legal personhood, it needs to be an amalgamation of different aspects, and it also needs to be sector specific. And this is something, again, where there's no definite yes or no answer that legal personhood has been granted and this is how it needs to be granted. But that is a key element which still needs to be answered. Now, just on the second sort of way in which law also can affect or regulate AI is access to data. Data is the largest driver for artificial intelligence to carry out development and also for AI to grow. And what we've seen is with several data protection legislations coming up, like the EU GDPR, and even in the proposed data protection bill in India, there have been thoughts behind how access of AI to data and how AI also needs to obtain specific information or specific consent before accessing data and how this needs to be regulated. All of these sort of laws which limit the ability of AI to access data is another critical element as well. And what needs to be seen here also is while there needs to be some form of oversight as to how the AI is obtaining data, you also need to keep in mind that you can't have a law that overly regulates and which sort of inhibits artificial intelligence from being innovative and from being creative. So that balance is something else that needs to be kept in mind.
Thank you, Abhishek. You touched two of the important topics of many legal regulations when it comes to AI. I think the point where giving a special whether it's a citizenship or a recognition, legal recognition as a separate entity is important, especially when it is part of robots, right? It's when you're looking at it separately from robots perspective. See, when it comes to company, board of directors and to some extent shareholders take responsibilities for the actions of the company, and something goes wrong. The board of directors set up the governance, they run, and some extent there are people who can, you can look at those people. Now in this situation the question will be, who actually will become liable, right? Would it be the developer, would it be the user, would it be the trainer which actually selected the data? Where exactly you will point out the liability. Things are new, things are evolving, and as things go on, I think lot will come up, and we will be able to start putting a liability or the responsibility aspects to each different players on how AI performs. Similarly, your other point on privacy and data protection is very critical. Um, uh, we are looking at AI being actually reliant on a lot of data, though most of the data is anonymized and outside the privacy domain. Often governments are now looking at trying to look at how do you control even the anonymized data, right? But even otherwise, it is sometimes invariable. I mean, it is sometimes unavoidable that even a non-private, non-anonymized data may become crucial, whether it's a face recognition technology, whether it is voice recognition technology. A lot of time that data will become very, very critical, which may not be anonymized and which may end up being sensitive personal data, and hence this is an important thing on how do you balance, right, on the data. So thank you, Abhishek. I appreciate. Maybe let me go back to Mihir. And we did discuss interplay between AI and law. Now, Mihir, in your experience, to what extent law can help with ethical issues in AI?
Sure, Vaibhav. See, as we talked earlier, law is nothing but a codified principle of appropriate behavior, which is enforced by certain government agencies. So government agencies and companies all have to come together to think about what are the ethics in AI. So what I try to do is look into 4 different categories. Of course, there are many other, but 4 are most relevant one. One is discrimination. How AI is going to create discrimination. Now, the discrimination can be based on race or gender or age or social status, which is, like India, caste system and all of that. Economic status, geographic location. We often talk about digital divide. So how AI is going to deal with discrimination? Is AI going to increase inequality in the society, or AI is going to reduce inequality in the society? So one group of aspects could be related to effect of AI on inequality. Second category I look at is the purpose of business. Business Council and a lot of other organizations have started talking about the purpose of business is to focus not on just shareholder, but the stakeholders, which includes employees, which includes suppliers and the customers and the entire supply chain and the society at large. So is AI going to abuse the monopoly in the supply chain? Is AI going to create issues when there is a temporary blockage in a supply chain? Is AI going to abuse special circumstances of people, such as disability or health condition or socioeconomic situation? So the purpose of business around which we can develop different laws related to ethical aspects on AI. Third thing I would say is optimization level. At what level we are optimizing AI? AI is nothing but a predictive algorithm. So it is trying to optimize in a certain decision-making situation. So at what level we are trying to optimize? Are we optimizing at an individual level or one company level, or are we optimizing at the society level? And this is where a lot of aspects of unemployment, for example, when AI comes into play, robotics comes into play, there will be a huge unemployment that everybody's talking about. Think about, driverless trucks coming on the road. A lot of drivers will be out of business. That doesn't mean we can't rescale them, but that aspect of unemployment we will have to deal with. Another aspect at the optimization level is the security. If you read article by Nishith, by our founder, as well as our colleague Arya, on weaponization of autonomous, AI. So how AI can be weaponized. So that security aspect is another aspect where are we trying to optimize what is good for an individual or for a society? That's a third aspect. Fourth aspect I try to look into is the horizon at which our focus is. Is the horizon of AI at a short-term level or the profit-making level, or the horizon is at the long-term level or sustainability level, which is really deals with a lot of aspects of environmental issues. At the same time, for individuals, directly deals with addiction. Are we creating AI which addiction for shopping? Are we creating AI which creates addiction for gambling? Is it creating addiction for certain health issues? So when we are using AI in a different aspect, 4 things we need to keep in mind. One is it creating discrimination or inequality? Is it dealing with the purpose of business, which is to focus on stakeholder as opposed to only shareholder? Optimization level, which is optimizing for the society, and short-term versus long-term horizon of sustainability. So these are the 4 categories of areas where certainly AI, a law can come into play and help us define regulations for AI.
Thank you, Mihir. This is interesting what you said. Let me go back to Abhishek for some legal question. Mihir talked about ethical consideration one needs to keep in mind, and some examples of that, right? What do you think? Are these ethical consideration which can be legally enforced? Abhishek?
when we speak considerations, I think the most critical question that comes up again is how is liability also going to be imputed when you talk about AI and the acts of AI? As Vaibhav had mentioned earlier, so in most of the times, the question that always comes up is it the developer or the person who's programming the AI and plugging in the initial information? Is that the person who sort of, you need to have law regulate them at the time of development and say that these are specific guidelines you need to adhere to, and if there is any harm caused or any damage or anything that an AI does in violation of this, you would be personally held responsible? Or is it in the sense that liability also would be imputed independently to an AI itself, separate from the developers? Now, looking at this question of how liability needs to be imputed, there are three sort of specific, let's say, principles behind this, or three different ways in which this can be done. Now, the first and the most common manner in which this is looked at under law is that an artificial intelligence is merely looked at as an agent of the developer, who is merely functioning based on a certain specific set of instructions, and whatever result that arises due to those instructions, it is the developer themselves who has to be directly held responsible for those actions, and hence law needs to be framed in that way where the developers are regulated. Now, the second principle, or the second way that this is looked at, is more from the concept of negligence, where you have developers who develop AI or plug in information into AI with good intentions and with the intention to sort of have a specific, positive outcome. But during the functioning of the AI in itself, once the instructions have been plugged in, there may be certain actions which occurred or certain instances which occurred, which was not the intention of the developer. And in that case, also what this principle says is you have something like the law of torts, where you have another manner of enforcement, hold the developer responsible again in that sense for negligence that has arisen due to actions of the AI that they've developed. And the final manner in which has also sort of been looked at in the third principle is you recognize that an artificial intelligence functions independent of its instructions, where you have instructions which are plugged in by the developer at the initial stage, have law which regulates AI directly in the manner in which it functions, and you hold an AI independently responsible, where you have actual penalties which may be enforced against the AI itself, which, for example, may be that you have access to data shut off for the artificial intelligence for a particular period of time, and you remove it from access to the internet, which is a way in which this can be also looked at. So the sort of broad way in which law in AI itself can come into play and enforcement is looking at how liability can be sort of imputed to actions of artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Abhishek. I think you made very important points, right? And I think there's a lot of thought process behind this, which is happening at the hands of regulators and the legislators, right? On how do we address these issues of liability? And if you really ask me, a lot of us have to learn in how they behave before right decisions can be taken. So the way I'm looking at it, that it will be trial and error method in trying to create a framework for attributing liabilities and building enforcement. I think it will happen over a period of time. With this, let me come to Darren. Darren, can you give some concrete examples from healthcare industry, how these considerations are incorporated into laws and policies?
Thanks, Vaibhav. So I think, I'll start from where Mihir had raised a very important point on social discrimination, because this is a very important aspect, especially when it comes to health delivery as well. And the reason I'm saying this is because there is always human touch, human, interaction when it comes to healthcare delivery, which, if AI were to be involved, there needs to be a degree of separation between how exactly or what exactly AI can function, or the areas in which AI can function, and where there needs to be a physical interaction with the patient itself. Some of the primary reasons, and I think I'll cover it here, is because patient conformance with the treatment plan is a lot better when there is a human interaction, because it also drives better honesty in terms of being able to give out the right symptoms, And it also helps with getting the patient to understand the treatment plan and the course itself. And this again comes back from the black box phenomenon, because at the end of the day, the AI will only take input and provide an output. And so the patient may not be able to fully understand why exactly the treatment has been the way that it is, or why the diagnosis has happened the way that it is. So some of these issues are something that pharma companies, as well as companies that are purely in the technology side, such as IBM, Infosys, in fact, is also looking at these things. So what they are doing right now is coming up with a lot of different guidelines and self-regulatory codes itself. Primarily, what they are basing their self-regulatory codes is on the EU guidelines that have been released in terms of how to deal with AI and ethics in AI. So we see companies like Sanofi, AbbVie, and I think as of right now, there are almost 43 companies that are actively using AI. A lot of them have put out their own policies in order to try and meet with the primary issues in ethics when it comes to healthcare delivery. One is to determine what areas there can be full autonomy for AI to perform its function, and where there needs to only be a support function for the healthcare provider to be supplemented. And of course, the other is to eliminate the involved in terms of data collection and the data inputs that are coming in. So apart from these two, the other primary concern, of course, is on the patient privacy and data protection itself. And this is again important because the kind of developments that are taking place with the help of AI is largely at the genomic level, which means that companies now have access to individuals' genomic data, which is very, very specific and independent to anybody else as well. So with that kind of data, it comes with a lot of responsibility on the person collecting such information to hold it at the most responsible way possible. So there are already a lot of companies that are trying to put in place checks and balances to, one, of course, anonymize the entire data. But apart from that, where, of course, it's not possible, they are looking to try and disseminate as much information as possible to build a system of trust with the patients who are willing to provide such data, so that they are aware and are giving informed consent as to how that data may be used. So these are some of the examples on the company front. On the legislative side, when we look at it from an India perspective, we see that we are still at stage one. At the policy level, while the Niti Aayog and a couple of other departments have put out policies, they are still looking at it from the data collection point of view at the healthcare level, because they're still trying to address the issue of digitization of healthcare, as well as trying to have interoperable digital health records itself. And I think these are primarily some issues that need to be addressed before we can move forward with respect to delivering AI at an optimal level in India. Over to you, Vaibhav.
Thank you. A lot of things are happening in India as we see in the world. So it's nice. Mihir, let me come back to you. You spent significant time in Silicon Valley, right, where a lot of AI developments are happening, right? What are these top tech companies doing to ensure that ethics are weaved into AI? What are their thoughts?
Sure. See, every company is looking into AI. There has been a lot of debate about AI and ethics. You must have followed, Twitter by Elon Musk. But what they have done is they've come together and created a group called Partnership on AI. And the purpose of this group is to think about in developing responsible AI. Many tech companies have joined this group, including Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, and all other, all the major ones. What they are trying to do is, through this partnership, developing guidelines. And the basic aspect of guideline is that AI should be beneficial, it should be unbiased, it should be safe, it should be accountable, and it should protect privacy. And some of this aspect we already discussed in this discussion. But at the same time, they are also trying to develop guidelines where AI should not cause harm. AI should not be weaponized. AI should not violate law or human rights or societal norms. So all those guidelines, these companies are working around developing together under the umbrella of Partnership on AI.
Thanks, Mihir. Let me Let me come to Abhishek. Abhishek, can you just in 2 minutes tell us what companies are done to self-regulate, and how are the policies? If you have anything to share there.
As Mihir also just mentioned, so what's happened in the recent past is several companies have been taking active steps themselves to ensure that they have detailed AI and ethics policies. And glancing through the key policies of quite a few of the several companies, there are around 4 to 5 major sort of principles that they're trying to keep in mind and maintain when it comes to their AI programs and also from an ethics perspective. Now, these 5 key sort of principles that all these companies have in their policies and they're trying to ensure that they adhere to. The first one, again, is accountability, where you have to ensure that any development or any AI product that the companies themselves put out, they ensure that at the stage of development, that they keep in mind that there needs to be certain biases, which is always a huge complaint or a huge issue with AI, that these biases are not there in the data that's input into the products that they're developing. And that is a principle of accountability where they're trying to ensure that their developers and their employees remove their biases and have an unbiased manner in which they carry out developments of their products. Now, the second broad principle is transparency, where all of these companies try to put out more and more information into the public, where you have IBM for its Watson, where they come out and provide information as to what actually goes into the development of its tool and how this information is plugged into Watson and how the final products are sort of reached at. And even Google, for that instance, where they put out information publicly via their white papers and discussion papers, saying that these are the actual sort of input information and this is how we're doing our AI development. The second key principle that they have is transparency. Now, the third principle, again, which is quite important, is the harm-based approach that a lot of these companies take when they're looking at their AI products, where the ultimate intention is to ensure that there is in no way an element of harm that may be caused to users who are actually accessing these tools and using these tools, and that the company takes adequate steps, whatever that it can internally, also to ensure that the final product can't be used either by its own developers or by other third parties, which may result in harm being caused. And the way in which in the past 1.5 years with the GDPR also sort of championing this concept of privacy by design, all of these companies are trying to ensure that they have a privacy by design built into their AI and ethics policies, where each step in the development process of their AI products, they ensure that adequate privacy and security standards, be it in collecting of the information that they use or the security that they have for the final information that's put out by their products, that is also kept in mind. And these are the 4 sort of main key principles that companies try to adhere to, which they mention in their policy.
Thank you, Abhishek. Darren, can you spend a minute on healthcare side, especially because he mentioned IBM Watson, and I remember we were helping IBM Watson on healthcare side in India. So maybe you can just spend a minute on that.
You're right. In a lot of instances, the essence is ideally the same when it comes to what pharma companies and healthcare companies are also trying to do. But what I'll also add in terms of what Abhishek has already pointed out is that a lot of the pharma companies have identified that these are going to be living documents, primarily because they are going to keep evolving. So they've kept some amount of leeway, both in terms of suggestions from the public as well as comments from policymakers, so that they are able to constantly modify the principles that they are trying to adopt when it comes to application of their AI products in the delivery of healthcare systems itself. So I think more or less Abhishek has covered the 5 essential AI principles, but what I see is that pharma companies will also try and keep the entire thing a little more flexible.
Thank you. I think companies are doing it individually. There are some institutions who are working on it. There's a collaboration of companies who have set up policies, etc. But the world at large, especially the government, needs to come with together come with proper framework and guidelines. And I think that's in works and something we should see in future, hopefully. With this, I think we are getting a lot of question and answers questions in the question from the participants, and let's go to the question and answer session. Maybe I will take the first question coming from. Okay, the first question which I'm taking up is this is from Mr. Sen Gupta, and it says, how do you suggest that the AI system in autonomous car be developed to address the trolley problem, and how do you think the Motor Vehicles Act and other laws be amended to address this issue? Furthermore, how do you think the Indian laws be framed to ascertain liabilities in case of accident by autonomous vehicle? This is a very interesting question. Let me take a shot first and see if any of the other panelists wants to add anything. Right? I think we will need to have a complete revamp of Motor Vehicles Act if you want to introduce autonomous vehicles in India. Autonomous vehicles, in my mind, are not likely to come up, so I don't think government is going to look at what changes need to be bring. I think it will be completely different regulation or law. From perspective of liability in case of an accident, again, it will go back to the same principle. Is it something which was a programming issue, which is then treated as a manufacturing defect and goes back to the liability of who manufactured it? Is it a training issue, or is it something which is a user issue? So often in a situation where if it is a manufacturing issue or it is a development issue, then it will go back to the developer. And when you look at fully autonomous car, I think what we are looking at, the driver being completely redundant and just doing a passenger, so all liability can go to the manufacturer. However, we are not likely to see fully autonomous car at all. We are going to see more of semi-autonomous car, where there are a lot of systems which are helping the driver, and driver will have certain power or what do you call projects to protect itself and override the autonomous features. Now, in that situation, the allocation of liability will become very, very difficult, and then the liability may actually shift to the driver because he had an ability to override, and if he was not paying attention, right, in which case the driver will have to have a liability. Now, often, where do you draw a line really depends on the sophistication of the technology, the features of automation versus how easily and quickly the driver could have done the override and use the manual. This is something which will need to be developed, but the principle will remain the same, that if the data was trained wrongly, and if for example the airbags didn't deploy when the accident happened, or the driver wanted to override but was not able to override, or in a split decision before even driver can override, the autonomous took a decision to go ahead and get into a certain act which it should not have done, then it goes back to the manufacturer. So often you will need to look at different situations to determine whether it is a developer's liability or it is a driver's liability. And in developer, again, it goes back to whether it is car manufacturer, it is the technology provider, it is the training data which was faulty, where exactly was the issue, and we need to look at it. So in other words, no clear answer to this under Indian law. Things will develop, but principles are there which can be used to develop that law. I hope this answers the question. Maybe I can take the next another question from this, and maybe I will give it to maybe Darren or Mihir or Abhishek to take it up. It's a very interesting question. Is lack of regulation leading to hampering development of AI and its technological advancement? Mihir, do you want to take this question, or Darren, do you want to take this question? Or Abhishek?
Sure, I will I'll start with little thing and then hand over to Darren. See, lack of regulation always creates uncertainty, because when there is no regulation, companies don't know in what direction we need to go. Investors don't know in what direction we should invest in. Because if you invest money into it, you put in time and resources into it, and suddenly a government comes back and say, okay, we don't allow this. Of course, if there are certain new data that comes in and which makes that decision is a different thing, like in case of e-cigarette. But when there is no regulation, there is no clarity on regulation, or there is no clear regulatory trend about certain new technology, in those cases, it will hamper innovation simply because, for one, either the companies will go out and do it and get burned, or the other, there will be a lot of responsible venture capitalists and investors are not going to invest in those technology. Darren, go ahead, your point.
Yeah, so thanks, Nirva. I think to the extent that the law should come into play, I believe that it should remain to the extent that it is guidelines, only because when we're looking at emerging technology, especially that's still growing, to the extent that we can self-regulate, it may be better because, you know, we can at least look at where there are going to be pitfalls, where there are going to be issues. And for the time being, have a self-regulatory code at the central level or at the government level, put out guidelines that will broadly govern how exactly the entire process should, on the basis of identified issues so far already. And those are, again, the 5 issues of biasness, transparency, accountability, and responsibility that, you know, like the EU and other countries, we should try and keep the regulation to a guiding principle as opposed to it being on a strict crackdown measure.
Thank you, Mihir and Darren. When you were saying, I remember the quote by Devang Mehta, who used to be president of NASSCOM, when he said that if we had Ministry of Software, the software industry would not have progressed as much as it has. So I think that answers the questions, right? Okay, I will go into the next question. Abhishek, this is for you. Maybe you can and I can add on after you have answered. This is a question which says that assuming if we get into stage where we give personhood to AI and start entering into contracts, how we will enforce such contracts?
Sure, Vaibhav. So I think maybe one way in which we can look at it is in India, at least under the IT Act, there already e-contracts or electronic contracts are already a recognized form of a valid contract. And where also you have certain measures such as digital signatures, online signatures, where there is an understanding under the IT Act itself with electronic records being recognized that digitally executed contracts are regarded as valid contracts subject to certain conditions being met. Now, under the Contract Act, with the requirement being that a person with valid capacity to contract has to be a party to the contract, if AI is provided that actual personhood and is recognized as a legal person, then there is already a way in which we can sort of look at the IT Act and build further on those principles, sort of add to how those contracts can be enforced.
Thanks, Abhishek. I think I will also add to what Abhishek said, right? The moment you end up giving a legalhood or personhood to AI, right? The way it will be enforced will be no different than how, let's say, it's enforced against a company. Company basically is, a legal person, right? It's given a personhood to a company, and you can enforce a contract against a company. Company has assets and liabilities from which it pays. In certain situation, you can lift the corporate veil. Certain situation, directors may have a liability, right? Now, similar principles will need to be used, because here, for example, an AI-based robot, for example, if you're given a personhood, he or she may not have assets or liability like company has, but a person who is in charge of the robot may have. So certain liability will be attributable to that particular person. It may be in similar situation like company, like how, for example, in certain situation you go to the shareholder. Same way, in certain situation you can go to the developer or the owner of the robots. In certain situation you can go to the controller of the robot, right? In certain situation you just simply look at the robot and say, just like you put in jail, you can you can have robot getting into a jail or somewhat similar where he or the company which it develops may get affected in terms of that prison. So you will need to create those kind of concepts, use those kinds of concepts to apply to the AI person, right? It may not be perfect, but somewhere it needs to be created so that as long as things have done in good faith by the robot, the liability of robot is limited and doesn't go to the owner or to the developer. But if it is not to that extent, it can be brought in. So that those kind of concepts will need to be done. Going back,
Vaibhav, can I add
yeah,
one more thing? Yeah.
yes, sure.
See, another aspect that we haven't looked into is taxation, right? When humans create value and earn income or money, or corporation creates value or earn income and money, we tax them. We need to also think about when a robot creates value or robot earns money, how do we tax it, right? That's another aspect that we really need to develop into. How do we tax robots? How do we tax? Are they really part of an organization? Are they really under individual? There's a pass-through entity to robot or whatever aspects that are there. We need to also look into that.
Thank you, Mihir. We have two more questions or three more questions, but I don't think we may be in a position to address all of them with the time remaining. Uh, let me take this one, right? Mihir, maybe you can take this up. The question is with respect to transparency paradox. Should working of AI models be transparent and move away from black box algorithm? The flip side is well known. So from legal and risk assessment perspective, how do you balance this?
I think it's a very interesting question because there are different kind of AI models. The basic AI model is rule-based expert system, which is totally transparent because you create a decision tree, and using that decision tree, you build up a decision framework on which the AI model will work. And a lot of AI, when companies talk about, oh, we have AI, a lot of them have basically expert system or rule-based system built into it. The other type of AI models are what we call deep learning or machine learning, right? In machine learning, again, it can be partially transparent because a lot of time there's a clustering mechanism, KNN and other type of clustering, which basically you are able to look into it. However, there are other AI models, which is where a lot of potential is, what we call neural network model or what we call genetic algorithm model. A lot of those models are like our brain. Can you open the brain and see how you're thinking? Right? You can't. Even if you open the brain, all you see is a muck. You don't know how we are thinking. Nobody can know it unless you externalize it. Same way, there are AI model, which basically has a mechanism in which data is inputted and the output is fed into in the training part. And then after training is done, the AI model is put to use and the AI model makes the decision. And in those cases, you have basically black box approach. So if you really want to gain a potential of AI, you cannot have pure rule-based approach. You have to really look into deeper models of AI. That's where real value is going to come in. So, and those models inherently are working like our brain, where we can't just open our brain and know what's going on. So I don't think it's going to be feasible for us to have open AI in that sense, simply because real AI is going to come from these new technologies.
Thank you, Mihir. There is a very, a lot of interesting questions, but I will just take a couple of ones. I will take this one myself. Here the question is, with AI becoming more powerful, advances in quantum computing, issues are likely to be magnified. How are these issues going to be tackled with lack of industry standards and poor understanding of the tech by policymakers? I think you have hit the nail on the head. Technology is becoming more what I call critical, and it's important to get the right regulations and right laws in place. But the lack of understanding by the policymakers actually sometimes hampers rather than benefits the further development of law. And the way it is going to work is by self-regulation, and this is the way I believe is the right way for AI specifically to go forward. Now, self-regulation is to some extent, you can say that, okay, if I do a self-regulation, I may actually favor myself. But we are seeing that in order for companies to get that freedom, what they want, to develop what they want, government is saying, look, I may not understand you, this technology well to develop laws and regulations, but I do understand how you are behaving, and if you don't behave well, I will come heavily on you, right? Whether take privacy issues by Facebook, kind of a situation, right? Similar thing will happen here. So that's why, we took this whole questions of what companies are doing, and each company is actually looking at AI from ethical perspective. The association of companies are coming together to develop some guidelines and rules. Institutions are actually working. We are aware that some of the institutions are actually trying to develop, and foundations are actually putting money for developing standards on ethics, and people are expected to use this ethics as a part of the development in AI. And hopefully the government also will come together to form some kind of treaties which will interweave ethics into AI. So ethics is way to go from AI perspective and not wait for law. But this is something that is very critical, and this is how actually it will grow, and it should grow. With this, and I know we are running late. Last question I will take for Darren. Darren, will you take the question on racial bias by conversing?
There is considerable evidence of racial bias in facial recognition software. Some systems have misidentified darker-skinned women as often as 35% of the time, and darker-skinned men 12% of the time. Whether hiring company ethicists or instituting AI review boards can help us in resolving this issue, and if yes, then what should be the essential prerequisites? So, great question, because this is again something that we see a lot, even in the healthcare space and generally otherwise also. Especially because when there is a limited data available, and I'll give you the example of clinical trial data, a large repository of the clinical trial data that we have today is of a typical white US man. So you see that there is already an inherent bias because of the way in which the data comes in. So the way companies are trying to resolve this issue is one, yes, you're right, the do that. And also to ensure that in your AI review board, you have a diverse set of people so that all sorts of ethnicities, all sorts of cultures, and all sorts of backgrounds can come into the entire training and learning process for the AI machine itself. Another one is to also implement the feedback mechanism, whereby every time an AI is identified to be swaying towards a particular direction, there is a way to retrain the program by adding additional data points from a diverse perspective in order to try and eliminate that bias going forward. Over to you, Vaibhav.
Thank you. With this, I think we have addressed many questions which came up. I think we are already over time, so we will end the session now.